Hello, people. My name is Marshall Gregory Thomas. Welcome to the 28th Amendment Tiny Concert Series here in the Music Bunker, where Ron is always on my shoulder. Thank you for being here. Not going to do any music tiny concert right away. We're just going to have a brief talk about the Pilgrim Effect. The Pilgrim Effect is it's a term used in biology, where the scientific observer comes into a new habitat, a new environment, um, and you reasonably assume that this environment is, as you see it now, is exactly as the way it has been. Um, However, in point of fact, the habitat has been in flux and has been transformed one or more times, often radically and rapidly transformed. So I remember a world 3 generations ago where violence between men was, frankly, it was a normal thing, fistfights. Violence between men happened when words failed. And when men uh, moderate each other's behavior, if words fail, if reason and logic fail, then we resort to fists or violence. Um, People didn't immediately resort to firearms 3 generations ago, 2 generations ago. Um, Instead, they quite frankly, honestly, they beat the crap out of each other with fists, sometimes with clubs or occasionally knives. Sure, okay. There was a movie in 1980 called The Warriors, kind of a B movie, but it became kind of a cult classic. It's about gang violence in New York City circa 1980, um, where these turf wars are playing out in the manner that I described. Now, today the film looks kind of like a live action role play, like a LARP, or some kind of cosplay costume drama. uh, because within 2 years of this movie, by the early 80s, the crack wars had begun. And the people in these neighborhoods, people in the hood, if you will, were suddenly settling disputes with handguns of every caliber. Um, I was 18 at the time and had a problem with authority, as sometimes teenagers do, and I didn't pay traffic fines on general principles. I just looked at it as unlawful taxation without representation. I don't know, I was a teenager. So I didn't pay my traffic fines. Therefore, I was often sitting in the city or the county jail in Houston over the weekend, or it was 1982, thereabouts, and the black guys, the Soul Brothers, they're showing me, you're sitting around for 12 hours or 2 or 3 days, in a little dungeon together. They're showing me 3 or 4 gunshot wounds on their bodies. Here's a 45, this is a 38, got a 22 or 25 over here, you know. So this level of violence, it had suddenly gone to the next level virtually overnight, in 2 or 3 years. Now, today in 2019, no self respecting, uh, you know, young thug would sport a weapon as small as, that small, But so the caliber of the weapons being used has increased. They have a higher muzzle velocity. They've turned up the volume. The types of bullets are tend to be more insidious. The number of rounds, in a magazine, so they've upped the volume on this thing. It's all escalated tremendously, really, since I started observing this phenomenon. I mean, you know, even your granny doesn't have a gat that small, a 38, a 22. No self-respecting thug is going to perforate or ventilate some guy with a 38 or a 22. But it's still basically the same domestic Vietnam War going on out there for the last 40 years. And looking back, it seems kind of strange how the rules kind of changed overnight, and how an edgy movie, what was an edgy movie at the time, 1980, movie about a costume gang violence, became some kind of quaint, LARP, a live action role play. In just a few years, the real streets had become a sea of crack and coke, floating in a bloodbath. Um, in societal terms, the radical change had happened overnight. Now, in the 80s and 90s, I visited Washington, D.C. frequently, and I lived there from 2006 till 2012. So I got the feel of the place pretty good. And in the late 80s, the crack wars had been going strong for a while. In Washington, D.C., you had the elite political class who ran the nation and arguably ran the world from D.C. Yet, they're not in control of their own house, even. The District of Columbia was terrifically violent, just 2 or 3 blocks away from the Capitol dome itself. Uh, you could sit in your office in the seat of judicial or congressional power, right next to these, and you could literally gaze out the window, and at a distance of like 200 or 300 feet, you could watch people getting mugged and shot, you know, um, across the street from where you park your car. This is not an exaggeration at all. Okay, so I would drive into the city at the break of dawn, and you're groggy and you're grumpy, and you've been in stop and start traffic. And as I pass through, you're getting real close. As I pass through the surrounding, hood, no more than like a couple of miles from the seat of power, literally, you would see a line of people, like 50 or 100 people long, um, waiting to buy their crack or their heroin before they start their working day. So, there's a lot of money involved. There was no shortage of customers right out in the open. And, these are people who work in offices generally, And so from the dubious safety of my car as I'm driving through these neighborhoods, on this main thoroughfare, it's the main street, I'd even seen the fire department, out with their hoses in the first light of day, washing the blood off the street and down into the gutter and into the sewer, the blood from these bodies in these turf battles that happened 2 hours before the sun came up. So they're still cleaning it up, you know. Um, this is capitalism turned up to 11. Okay, it's no holds barred capitalism, is what it is really. Um, and what I was viewing was essentially what had just been a hostile takeover. Okay, so 7,000 bodies a year filled the morgues, uh, not just in this city, of course, but you know, in the early crack war, which was equal to a modest year in Vietnam, 7,000 troops. 9,500 was like a high, and 7,000 is like a very slow or modest year in the life of the Vietnam War. So this is a Vietnam War being fought. There's no hyperbole there. And that rate has remained remarkably steady over the years ever since. It's gone down somewhat, but not as much as you might think. The political, in this town, the political administrative class of college educated, upwardly mobile, well-meaning whites would get in their workday near the mall or near in the Capitol, and you end your day at a reasonable hour, okay, at this point in time, and they walked rapidly to their cars, at times I was one of them, and you tear ass out of the district, all right, to get to safety, which is outside of the Beltway, is safety. So before darkness finds you, okay, them, I count myself among them, okay. In the evening, there was about an hour before dark when all the sane people had left and fled for their lives, literally. And the sun's still up, and there's an eerie silence that seems to echo forebodingly among these giant empty government office buildings. It's like an old movie, in the twilight before Dracula rises up in search of fresh blood. Uh, yeah, this felt worse, because this wasn't a movie, and you know, all you need for Dracula is a cross and a stake, a wooden stake. Okay, the mindless violence that engulfed the District of Columbia seemed to have no answer. The peaceful black families, they remain behind. Okay, and they're trapped in their houses. They behind iron bars on the doors and iron bars on the windows, but that didn't stop the bullets. Okay. Uh, the black guys in wheelchairs were in evidence everywhere, and they were the most obvious ambassadors of the war because they're parked everywhere, where fine liquor and cigarettes were served. Typically, um, their lives had been saved through heroic measures, but what kind of life were they left with? Things alleviated somewhat in the 2000s. Things got better when the new mayor, he embraced the developers, and so these developers, they gambled millions and millions of dollars, and they transformed parts of the city with really nice malls and very nice high-rise residential and commercial buildings. Excuse me. But they'd created kind of a false utopia made out of glass and steel. Things were still happening the same way. The Anacostia River that surrounds the capital, it still continuously fills with untreated human waste and epic amounts of garbage. 5% of the district is still HIV positive and using heroin on a daily basis. Heavily armed young black men nightly still go hunting in the asphalt jungle. The Capitol Hill power plant still belches coal smoke into the sky. And corruption, like a third world failed banana republic, is still the rule of the road for these local governments. And for the capital as well, let's not have the pot calling the kettle black. There's plenty of corruption to go around. Nothing really changes. The drug war marches on today. Nothing changes, So, in for instance, a vignette in the very small neighborhoods in Miami, Florida, known as Little Haiti, Liberty City, and Overton. These are typically like 10 blocks by 15 blocks sized small neighborhood. A spot shotter detection system that's set up to, an audio system that can triangulate the sound of a firearm and pinpoint it exactly within, basically like a foot. The spot shotter detection system in these essentially two small little neighborhoods recorded over 8,000 bullets fired in 2015. So many bullets that when the detection, when the bullets entered their houses, the residents no longer even bothered to call the police. And these children that live in are permanently traumatized, of course. They're living in a war zone. The gun violence by this time has become detached from the drug wars. I mean, the drug wars are still going on, but the violence, it's now a form of recreation and bragging rights. So young black men achieve status by killing other, young black men. Going into prison for, a few years, several years is kind of like a rite of passage. And then re-entering the community with this new red badge of courage. They've got their red wings. They've got respect. It's a rite of passage. And so, like a snowball rolling downhill, this thing has taken on a life of its own. Now, I frequently traveled to the South to satisfy my sense of adventure. Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean. Mexico and Central America had always been the wild, wild west in the 80s and 90s. But then the similar phenomenon of rapid transformation occurred there too, that I observed. What had been a lawless place became a killing field of incredible barbarity and body counts that seemed to defy all expectation and all reason. The rise of the cartels led directly to thousands of mass graves in the deserts. The government and military both merged together with the cartels. Now the police and the army were the death squads. Okay, this was a sea change, and in the mid '90s, it was chaotic and scary as it had been for decades. And but then by the early 2000s, 2004 thereabouts, it went to the next level. It went next level very rapidly, and in 10 years, 300,000 people were dead in Mexico alone. I was shocked and saddened how it had morphed into a next level industrial mass murder machine, a killing field. I refer to the place as a killing field now. I cried for Mexico. I cried for the people. I cried for the Mexico of my youth. A place where the people I met didn't want anything from me. They just wanted to be my friend. The elements had always been there, kind of not even that much below the surface. So, it was a transformation, but the elements had always been there. I first went to Mexico City in 1977 when I was a minor. It was a mega city of the future, even then. 18 million people with the infrastructure of, less than a million. Killing air pollution. Air pollution that you have to see and experience to really believe. Dwindling water supply, going, gone. Crushing traffic, maddening traffic. Fake beggars and panhandlers. Pretty girls. That was my impression of Mexico City in 1977. When I got home, I read about this guy there. He owned a trucking business, and he had worked hard every day for 20 years. He didn't spend any of his money except to plow it back into his business. And so he was a modest success. He was a modest success, despite the morditas, the little bites, the bribes you have to pay every day to everyone to get, just to get through the day, really. Typically after 10 or 20 morditas, there's little bites, there's nothing left. That's the experience of a regular person living in that society. So, he had made something of himself despite this. Well, his 10-year-old son was kidnapped. The phone rang. He agreed to all their demands. He paid, his $30,000, all that he had, and waited for naught, all for naught. His son was found dead a few days later. Okay, so he went to the police station for help, and then he heard something that sent a chill down his spine. He heard the voice of the kidnapper coming out of the mouth of one of the detectives in the office next to the one he was in. The distinctive voice of the kidnapper. This guy's powerless, What can he do? He can't go to war against the entire police force. He can commit suicide, or he can go home and bury his child. In a few years, just a couple of years, the peso was devalued tremendously. And people like him were wiped out again financially. All the people that had worked hard for decades. I was across the border, across the frontier, but I had grown up in no man's land, so, I felt a responsibility. But I was forced to accept that I could do nothing to help them. And I thanked God that I was born in the USA. And I vowed then and there even as a very young person, to defend what I had inherited, what I had been given. Not what I had created, what I had been given by other people who had come before me and had sacrificed over not just centuries, but 2,500 years practically, really. How could I know that in just 20 years, these unfortunate people living next door, in essence, these people would descend down into the pit of hell. And today there is seemingly no end in sight for what they're going through. Now, for decades, I went to college a lot, worked and went to school, got a couple of degrees, For decades, I read learned academic papers about how transnational corporations were eventually going to supersede the nation state, in their wealth, their power, their influence, and gradually these transnational entities were going to assume control over all our lives, like some kind of soft version of the 1975 movie Rollerball. Well, the dot-com bubble popped in 2001. The war without end began the same year. Then in 2008, the credit default swap fraud, $65 trillion fraud, crashed the entire world economy, came crashing down. Now, looking back, it seems, as if these masters of chaos, masters of the universe, they used each crisis to ratchet up their leverage and their control. Now, today, the transnational trillion-dollar corporations, the masters of the universe in banking and finance, my interpretation is that these people are intent on destroying the nation state in order to control it. I witnessed the crack wars taking over the streets in real time and turning the world into a shooting gallery. It was an eye-opening experience, to say the least. I've traveled to the South, and seeing it turned into the killing fields. And it's not, it's not hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. It's now the killing fields. It's horrifying, depressing. It's instilled these feelings of helplessness, not being able to help these people escape their descent into hell. Well, now it seems that the oligarchy, we live in an oligarchy. The oligarchy of control, if you will, is intent upon destroying the nation state in America and Europe. And I'm beginning to intuit another transformation. This is just my intuition. A transformation that will emerge as next level violence, next level chaos. It seems possible that the masters of chaos are intent upon bringing terror into the heart of the Western democracies in order to neutralize them and control them, in order to create a world that is safe for oligarchy, if you will, to destabilize in order to control. The 1987 movie RoboCop showed us a campy corporate urban wasteland that was a mythological future Detroit, one that was kind of hard to suspend your disbelief and invest in, but once again, B movies from the 80s seem to be prophetically pointing the way. Today, the once rich and powerful Detroit is a failed state, a wasteland, a harbinger of the future. California and blue states are filled with poverty and homelessness. They're beginning to resemble a failed Venezuelan socialist utopia. The coming violence, cartel expansion, and merger between politicians and transnational criminal organizations, this occurs, it's going to ruin our lives and the lives of our children, more to the point. You know, I still feel as if I'm helpless watching these larger social forces play out. You know, like the 18-year-old sitting in a dungeon, seeing all the human bodies riddled with bullet holes. You know, these people walking around still carrying these fragments of lead inside their bodies. I mean, how are you ever going to get through a metal detector and get on a plane? I can see where this is going. You know, I don't feel any more capable of stopping it today than I did then. To be perfectly painfully honest, a few years ago, you know, I would wonder, you know, where are the wise men? Where are the wise men and women? Our leaders who can protect us from some terrible, inevitable fate. You know, it's a really bad day when you have to admit to yourself, like that father in Mexico City who lost his child, or these wise men and these wise women who lead us, they're the very ones who are leading us down. Like Mexico, down. Like Detroit and DC, down, down, into the pit of hell. Is it a conspiracy? Is it a conspiracy of dunces? Which is just as likely. The question is, does it matter if they're doing it on purpose or out of ignorance? If the result is the same? It's like being abused, you know, by people you love, people charged to protect you, yet these people aren't our parents. They're not our family. You know, they're not our friends. I mean, we owe these people no loyalty. We owe these people no allegiance. And let's face it, the social compact of shared sacrifice and shared reward has long been broken in the society. The sacred hoop of the world is broken. The nation and our civilization spins out of control. You can feel it. You know, I wonder why I don't hunt them down, you know, like some hero in a movie. These oligarchs who are ordering the destruction of all that I hold sacred, you know. Am I a coward? You have to ask yourself the hard questions. Am I a coward for not stopping them, you know? Or am I just a law-abiding citizen in a democratic republic who's been brought up to tell the truth, follow the laws, and play by the rules? Who's going to stop these people? How? Since nothing is written, since nothing is preordained, okay? Nothing is preordained. And if nothing is preordained, then perhaps we will. People like you, maybe even people like me. I will make a plan. I will shape it in the Constitution. I will fight back with the law. I will pray for peace. Until the 28th Amendment makes its way into the public space, into the public domain, into the public mind, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. I'm going to go off solid food. I'm going to live on tea and coffee and whatnot. Tea and coffee. Yahoo! Not because I think it'll do any good, but maybe because I don't know what else to do. Put my faith in God. And God helps those who help themselves. So, the 28th Amendment it is. And my little drama of going on hunger strike. Well, we'll see if God helps those who help themselves. There's no guarantees in this life. And You know, the universe doesn't owe you anything. You go out into nature and you expect, you know, the universe to owe you food and water or protection from the elements, etc. Good luck with that. And so in a sense, I'm like, you know, the prodigal son or the fool going out into the wilderness. Hopefully not for 40 days and 40 nights. Ah, but here we all are, boys and girls. Here we all are. So, let it begin. God bless all here.